I'm your co-host Peter DeRosa with Solaris Insurance Agency and IMO, and I have my co-host Ken Lamantia with me today. Ken, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure, Peter. How you doing today?
It's been a long week, but it's been fruitful, hasn't it? So,
Yes, it has.
so we're gathered here today for our blog from Main Street to Your Street, and we're going to cover today qualified accounts, some basic information. We're going to go over the limitations and just give some understanding. Um, Recently this week we talked about the top five issues that most employees are facing, and believe it or not, understanding their retirements was on the list. I was surprised at how little education and understanding of retirement accounts is out there. So that's going to be our topic as we kick off today. Let me just go ahead and pull up our screen here. And so really, this whole concept that knowledge isn't power, but applied knowledge is, I think, is very important because as we see people right now, like I said, pain points for most employees, an understanding of investing, an understanding of retirement planning, it's causing a lot of stress in people's lives, Ken. I know you can attest to that. So go ahead and comment on that.
Well, I am surprised how little people know about their own retirement accounts. Um, the fact how a 401k works, what are the tax ramifications, what can you do? Do you just put money into it? That's the biggest misnomer that drives me crazy about retirement accounts. Like, just take a 401k or even a regular IRA. People think you just dump money into it and it's going to make you money. We understand, Peter, that most of all these things, 401ks, IRAs, they're nothing but a tax law. What is inside of them is what drives it. They're the engine that makes you the money or loses you money. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more as we go on.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll be able to cover it in today's session. We'll see how we get through it all. An introduction to qualified accounts. We're going to talk a little bit about 401k plans, simple IRA plans, traditional IRA plans, Roth accounts, comparing the retirement accounts. We're going to talk a little bit about some additional alternative retirement accounts, and we're going to talk about a little bit about some case studies and practical examples, and finish out the conversation today. So for definition and purposes, retirement accounts are tax deferred accounts. So you put the money in, the money's going to grow tax deferred. That means you're not going to be taxed on any of the gains or growth on the account until you take the distributions out. This is pretty much consistent across all of the retirement accounts that are traditionally used. Would you agree with that, Ken?
I agree.
So there are some tax-free accounts and there's some tax-free withdrawals that can occur. Now, those are specific accounts, and we'll touch on them real lightly. But there are ways to plan for a tax-free retirement. Just a lot of people aren't familiar with which programs or which products, or not necessarily products, but which programs and which solutions provide those benefits. And ultimately, all the qualified accounts, the goal behind them is to create an opportunity for long-term savings. Correct?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about savings for retirement and the crisis that exists in America right now. I think that's a good jumping off point for this conversation. Um, I saw a report literally this morning that 63% of Americans are nowhere near where they want to be on a financial level when planning for retirement. Only about 5% of Americans are actually on track for their desired goals for retirement. That's huge.
And Peter, it gets progressively worse because we don't take into inflation, the cost of goods. You can plan, and traditionally, I was taught a very long time ago, and it was a good lesson that my mentor taught me. He said, people said they got $500,000 in their retirement account, and when after you take out the taxes and people are living longer, they're running out of money in 7 to 10 years, and
Mm-hmm.
it. I can't believe that more people aren't focusing on this right now.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. I think part of it, part of the issue is obviously inflation, right? Inflation's affecting it in part. I think education is number two behind that. People just don't know that there are additional options or additional solutions to retirement that maybe they're not a 401k plan. Maybe it's a simple IRA, traditional IRA. Maybe it's one of the other ones. They're just not aware that there are different ways to get to the goal and finding um, the best solution for them. Sometimes it's the simple solution. Sometimes it's more complicated, but it provides better results for their goals. So I think education definitely plays, in the top three reasons why right now we're facing this kind of crisis.
The thing is, they're not really more complicated. They're just less known to the public. Actually, a lot of the solutions are simpler.
I agree with that. So let's talk about some of the qualified retirement accounts real quickly here. So qualified retirement accounts oftentimes include 401ks, 403bs, 457s, IRAs, and like Ken spoke of earlier, all that these names, all that they really mean is that this is how IRS views them and the tax purposes that the funds that are contributed, what kind of taxation do they have? And that's really all that these plans outline. Now, there are some additional there are some additional rules attached. For instance, 401k plans are very different than 403bs in that the fiduciary rules that are assigned to them. So if you have a 403b, there's a lot less actual fiduciary rules in place regarding how the funds are to be, what solutions can be used, what kind of fees can be charged on a 403b than on a 401k plan or even a 457 plan for that matter. So it does cause a little bit of frustration, especially amongst teachers and nurses that are often in those 403bs and or 457 accounts. You want to add anything to that, Ken?
Well, I think, like you said, we got to focus on education. And I think some of our blogs moving forward, I want to focus on these individuals' retirement plans, because I am amazed at how little people understand their own plans.
I agree wholeheartedly. So most of these plans have a base feature, which is you put the money in, you get a write-off now. The money will grow tax deferred for the future. And then eventually when you take the money out from most of these plans, you will be taxed. And so the part that people need to keep in mind, why is there so much of a push for a 401k or 403b, is that the concept is that you're using dollars that you would otherwise be paying to Uncle Sam, right, in the form of taxation. These are pre-taxed dollars. So when you get your paycheck, they're taking and reducing the taxes, and we're putting those dollars that would go to taxes first. We're putting them someplace else to grow and earn some interest before you have to pay the taxes on it, right? That's the concept.
That's the concept. And the sad thing is, financial professionals like ourselves, I call it investing backwards. I know it sounds oversimplified, but it really is. Yes, you get a tax write-off now, but you pay on the gains later on. That concept in itself is inherently flawed.
So I think we could rephrase that a little bit because I like the where you're going with that, and let me just add to that if I can. We're telling the American public you could pay IRS now, or 20 years from now, after you take all the risk and you do all the investing, IRS gets to visit you and they take their cut, which they're not going to tell you how much is actually going to be theirs off the top before you get your retirement money in the end. Is that about right, Ken?
That's exactly what it is. And when people start to understand that better, they're going to start exploring the other possibilities. And we're going to discuss some of them later on in the program.
Yeah. So the traditional retirement accounts are obviously in place. We talked a little about the 401ks, 403bs, 457 IRAs, but there are some additional traditional retirement accounts. And when I say traditional, we're talking about plans that have been utilized in place since the 40s. And some of them from the 70s, but they still have been around with a track record of over 40 years, and people are just not familiar with them anymore. And that would be TDAs, non qualified deferred compensation plans, 162 bonus plans, defined benefit plans, and pension plans. I mean, those are qualified retirement accounts. But people are just not as familiar with them because, well, they've just fallen out of use and fallen out of practice from Main Street. And that's why we're going to bring up some of these topics today, is to help educate people that the 401k is not the only option in town, and it might not be the best one for them either.
Well, when I grew up, Peter, all my grandparents and my uncles, they had pension plans. That was the norm. What we found out over time, that they were so expensive to manage, and that all the liability was put on those companies, and they had to produce for those people because they had a contract. What we basically did over time was shift the responsibility from the businesses onto the individuals.
Hmm.
And that's a trend that's more now than ever. That's why I think we have this gap in income. People are living longer, yes, but 401ks and other retirement plans, they, used properly, have their place. But you have to be educated on how they work and what the taxation is later on for you to be successful. Me and Peter call it an exit strategy. That's basically what it is.
So, Ken, back in 2018, 2019, we had states start to mandate, in fact, that employers that had 5 or more employees had to provide a 401k plan or a simple IRA plan to their employees, or they had to join the state pools because of this retirement crisis has gotten so bad and there's no more pensions. People are retiring with nothing. And I find that interesting because you just made the point there that people not that long ago were retiring with pensions. And now we had this whole phase where people are retiring with nothing. I think the government, state governments on that level, at least, are realizing that we've got to fix this somehow, and are mandating that employers provide some basic retirement plan in place to systematically cause people to save for retirement. Let's move on here. So, understanding qualified retirement accounts, basically the limitations and tax consequences before 59 and a half. All retirement accounts prior to 59 and a half do require a penalty be paid. And there's a reason for that. We'll get to that in just a couple minutes here with the trust. But the basic concept is, if you don't have a qualifying event and you take money out of your 401k plan, take money out of your 403b, take money out of your 457, your IRA, before 59 and a half, you're going to incur a 10% penalty tax on the money. Let's unpack that tax a little bit more. So some people are really confused as to what this actually is.
Well, the 10% penalty is they're going to give you tax deferred growth, but if you access the money early, you're going to pay a penalty for this. But what people don't take into consideration, yes, there's a 10% penalty, but there's also state, federal, and local taxes, which could be as high as 45%. So what do we know now, Peter? More people are dipping into their qualified retirement accounts,
Yes,
paying this huge fee, not the 10% fee, but they're also paying the taxes now, and they're eating away at their principal. And I think that's something we need to discuss just a little bit. So
we will talk about that. Let's finish up with this 10%, so people understand what that 10% represents. So if you take out of the $100,000 in your 401k plan, and you were to take out $10,000 prior to 59 and a half, you're going to get hit with a penalty. So the amount, the 10%, will reflect what, Ken? Is it going to be their income or 10% of the amount taken out?
it's 10% of the amount taken out.
Very good, very good. But like you said, then they're going to get hit with, okay, You took out the $10,000 out of the, 10% of 100,000, right? Now that money that's transferring to you after the taxation will also be considered a distribution, and it affects your income thresholds, right?
Yes, it does.
So depending on what state you're in, now you're going to get hit with state taxes on top of that pre-penalty. So for a lot of people, that automatically, by tapping into that 10% pre-penalty, um, that automatically throws them in a 30% boat right off the top.
It does. And again, people have emergencies. And one of the things we have to understand, yes, people do have emergencies. They got to access their money, but they got to take a look at the long term effects of this. And I'm glad we're discussing that because people just don't realize you keep dipping into it. You're going to pay all this extra money. And on top of that, you're affecting how long or how much money you're going to have in the future in your retirement.
I totally agree. And, from a lot of people, they do not understand, as I've tried to explain this numerous times to individuals, different individuals. But when it comes to accessing your money in retirement, if at all possible, and I mean that as nicely as possible, um, if it's at all possible for you to access the money through a loan provision, you really need to consider that before accessing the funds via a direct withdrawal. There really is, if you are a federal employee or state employee, or even if you are in the private sector and you have a loan that is allowable with your 401k, accessing the funds under that loan provision, whatever the interest rate is still going to be cheaper than accessing the money with a direct withdrawal, right? Because even if you're paying 8% interest on it, right, that's still cheaper than 30% being paid out in taxation.
And that's a huge difference. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's the smart play. You take a loan. First of all, like I said, you're losing 35% right off the top for penalties and and taxes. If you take a loan out, even if it was 10%, you're still 1/3 of the cost of what it would take the money the other way. That is something, and most people don't even know they can access their funds that way, Peter.
Unfortunately, that's very true. So many people don't. They never. If you have a 401k plan, we encourage everybody get a copy of the plan documents. Okay, when you first started, I'm sure it was given to you. It's required by law. They give it to you when you're hired, and they put you into the 401k plan. But everybody, puts the copy somewhere on a coffee table at some point in time. Then somebody cleans up and it disappears. So get a copy of the plan documents for you to review. How does this thing work? Because it's all set up, all the risk, all the planning is being put on you as the employee. You have to understand what you have in order to understand how to maximize it. So let's talk about the basic structure of a qualified account. And I think this is where a lot of people do not understand, truthfully, do not understand what is a qualified account. A qualified account, in most instances, not all, involves an employer and an employee contributing to a trust. Now, in some cases, the employer might contribute on behalf of the employee, and it goes directly either to the trust or directly to the investment vehicle, depending on which qualified retirement account is established. For most 401k plans or simple IRA plans, it's going to be a combination. So the money leaves the employer and the employee, like I said, and it goes to the trust. And this is sometimes called a third party administrator. Now, if you haven't, I encourage you to pull up your 401k plan and look at the top where it has the account. It will say on the paper, I know it says this on the statements, held in trust for, right? And then a list of the beneficiary, your name, your employee ID, or your account ID. So it's held in trust for you. And why is that important? Because, well, we talked about the pre 59 and a half penalty. So the trust, you're the beneficiary of the trust. If you take the money out before, there's a penalty because the trust was not planning on you accessing that money until a specific age. And that's where that penalty comes from. But let's talk about those bottom boxes there. real estate, stocks, insurance, blended, gold. Why do I have those boxes down there, Ken?
Because people don't understand. Now, not all retirement plans are different. They all have an administrator who manages the 401k. Most of them today are mutual funds. They also have index funds in them, but they also now are starting to leverage precious metals and real estate. But it's not it's not the actual real estate. It's not the actual metal. It's leveraged, and it's in the form like a EFT, or they put it into a mutual fund and they blend it. This is important that you understand that not everything has to be market based. There is an advantage and a disadvantage of always being in. This 5 boxes, if you understand how they work, I think this is the perfect blend.
So a lot of people automatically assume when you say 401k plan, you're talking about the stock market. And that's why we put this together so people could understand. No, a 401k plan, all that is telling IRS how the money's to be taxed going in and coming out. That's all that a 401k plan is. Like you said, the trustee or the employer determines based on the plan documents what are the choices of the investments for their employees to participate in. And it could be any one or a blend of these in the bottom here. And that's so important. So many people, we talk to them about, we're talking about qualified accounts. We're not just talking about 401k plans, because there are self-directed IRAs that you can invest entirely in a piece of property as a real estate option. Isn't that correct, Ken?
Yes, there is. And a lot of people understand real estate is a great investment, a great long term investment.
Other ones have self-directed gold accounts, or you can put gold or silver in a self-directed IRA account as a qualified account. I think this is an important step for people to understand that, look, you don't have to just put it all in the mutual funds or inside the stock market as your vehicle to earn returns or to help benefit your retirement scenario. And that's why we want to put this together. The other big piece to this equation that I just want people to stop and think about for a minute is the government created this trust and partnership. Why? This would have to go into a little bit of contract law. But since the government is the initiator or the grantor of the trust, they're ultimately the owner of the trust and all the assets held by the trust. Would that not be correct, Ken?
Yes, that's exactly right, actually.
So if the government all of a sudden decided, for whatever reason, that they're going to confiscate all of the assets and give an IOU, which is basically what they're doing anyways, to the trustees, the trust's beneficiary, would that be legal, Ken?
They do it all the time. We've learned in the Fed program that they borrowed so much money out of the G fund, there's actually no money in there. They're actually paying it out as they go along. And that's something people should be very aware of. That's a big IOU. They also did that with Social Security. It's not a qualified account, but it's a retirement account, and they do it all the time. And we have to start holding them responsible, because
I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about that for just a second. I know it's not really tied into everything else we're talking about, but I want to hit on this. You brought up Social Security going bankrupt because they borrowed the money out. Now, we both know that they're paying the money back, but they're always paying the money back at whatever the prevailing interest rates are. So if, for instance, the interest rate is 1%, they borrow it out at 1%. There's no positive gain or actual interest on that money. So if the money's not there earning you interest, it's a loss, correct?
I'm glad you brought that up. This is the misnomer people don't understand. If you take out $500 million, that $500 million would have grown and increased in value. We don't know how much. It depends on the market at the time or what they have in investments is. But That's the problem where people don't. So, they're going to pay it back, but they're not going to pay you back the gains that it would have made.
I'm glad
That
you said that. So, what can the Social Security Administration invest in? Do you know, Ken?
they have to be very conservative. As far as I know, it could only be bonds, government bonds.
Government bonds. That's it. There is nothing else that they're legally allowed to invest in. So, as an example, we go through the early 2000s and mid 2000s when interest rates were almost nothing. What were the bonds performing at, Ken?
They were zero, one tenth of 1%, 2/10 of 1%. And people still bought them, which I still to this day don't understand.
So, in wrapping this up, when the original calculations were done for the Social Security Trust Administration, they assumed a 7% rate of return for the duration of the account going forward. And we had at least 10, if not more, years where earned less than 1% or right around 1% return. That definitely negatively impacted the results for Social Security. But then I like to add in on top of that, if they borrow the money out and they didn't pay any interest back on it, they should have been paying 7%. They got away with paying nothing to at the most 1%. And that's why our Social Security funds, in part, are going away, is because poor management, like not even having a common sense management of how if they set this up to earn 7% and we're not making 7%, somebody ought to do something about making 7%.
And then insult to injury, they take money out of it on top of it. They borrow
There it
money
is.
against it. And now you have the perfect storm. This is why Peter and I spend a lot of time educating people, because Social Security, I think it'll always be there. Will you always get what you're supposed to get? I don't know, because it's so far behind. The catch up would take a bloody miracle to make it work.
Yeah. We'll have another topic where we will literally go into Social Security for the whole episode, and it'll probably be in a couple weeks here. I want to do that. But let's move on back into the 401k scenario here.
Hey, Peter,
So
can I bring something up real quick? I'm sorry to
go
interrupt you.
for it.
There's something I want everybody to understand about a 401k plan. One are the fees. They're on the average of 5%. We're going to discuss that at another time. That's the real number. But there's something that people don't understand that they really need to learn. Every 401k plan has an escape valve. That's what I call it. It's basically called a money market fund or a fixed account. Meaning, if you see the market getting beat up and you think it's going to be long term, or there's a war coming, or whatever it is, you can put that money into safe money. Yes, you may lose some coming up, but you won't lose any going down. Please look into your 401k. Every single one has either or, either a fixed account or, I'm sorry, it escaped me the word, a money market. I apologize.
Well, Ken, I'm glad you brought that up because we're not about giving financial advice to anybody on the program, right? Your situation is unique to you, but there are some basic concepts within money management. We call it the rule of 100. And before we go any further, I think it's applicable because of what you just said for us to bring it up. So, whatever your age is, so if you're 62 years old and you've got maybe 5 years or less to retirement, you need to evaluate. The rule of 100 would say at 62% of your money needs to be in cash or cash equivalent positions, and the balance needs to be earning you interest based on your time horizon and risk tolerance. And so many people don't understand that basic rule.
Well, why don't you explain that a little too? Why that's so prevalent?
Well, I believe that the main reason that we're seeing a lack of understanding in this is once again the financial literacy, but also the aspect that a lot of financial professionals, you could ask any stockbroker dealer, when's the best time to not be in the market?
That's the $128,000 question. Everybody has a different opinion on that. They really do. Um,
Absolutely.
and there's no right answer.
So when to not be in the market? I don't think you'll ever get a truthful answer. Like, it's always a good time to be in the market, according to the brokers and the dealers that we hear and we talk with and we communicate with. But the reality is, if you have less than 5 years to retirement, can you afford a loss or correction of 10, 20, 30% in your portfolio and still have the resulting retirement that you deserve? The answer is no. You,
No,
you
math
need
is not
to
on your side.
you need to implement that exit strategy and protect all of those years of work. Okay, because now you're at the point 5, 10 years out where the value of the accumulation is outpacing what you can actually earn. But we need to be very careful about the risk exposure because it could go exactly the opposite direction where you could earn less, right, through a loss, and then make you upside down where you still earn more than your money can earn, than your money can be credited in interest. And that's a huge issue for a lot of people. They don't understand how do you switch from accumulation to preservation. And that's really what we're talking about here is you if you're going to have a 401k plan, you need to write down a plan of action a year where you're going to decide, okay, I'm going to transition out of accumulation into preservation and eventually distribution. So let's move on with the 401ks here. So a 401k plan is a defined contribution plan, meaning there's a defined amount of contributions of money you can put in, defined amount of contributions that can be put in by the employer. The tax benefits obviously are because this money is used in a pre-tax income form, it reduces the amount of taxable income received by the employees. If there is any additional matching, the matching is a write off to the business owner. The money will grow at a compounded growth rate going forward, but um, there's no guarantees of what you're going to have for an income at the end. It's just going to be whatever it accumulated to. That's it. That's the bucket you have to work with. Okay. Um, a lot of people don't understand that, unfortunately, and I think more people need to begin to think beyond just like, okay, well, I just put it in there and I just do that. They actually have to give some thought. The average American spends less than 1 hour a year thinking about their retirement, right? In 2025, the contribution limits is 23,500. Okay, they have additional catch up that they allow, um, 7,500 if you're over 50. And then those who are ages 60 to 63, they've added an additional super catch up of 11,250. So you do have the ability to contribute quite a bit now into the 401k plan. Um, and part of that is that they're trying to offset the current shortfall that most people see in a 40% or more in their income when they hit retirement. What do you want to say on that, Ken?
Well, and this brings up a subject people have to understand. And I want to go into it right now because there are different kinds of retirement plans. Diversification is key in this point. Yes, you can put more money in, but is that in your best interest long term? What happens, and Peter just discussed it, if you have a loss? We call it time value of money. And I don't want to go into a long conversation. Basically, the older you get, the longer it takes to recoup your money, but it's not making money. You're just catching up to where you were. You have to also take into taxation. Yes, you can put more money in, but is that really worth it if the tax rate increases 10%?
Mm.
These are things we're going to discuss at another time, but these are things why we need more education about these programs.
I've got up on the screen here a couple of tax consequences before 59 and a half. And one of them, I just want to focus in on the one at the bottom because we've already talked about the penalties. Let's focus at the bottom here. Qualified rollover. So I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you've encountered it too, people who wind up, parting service and going to work in someplace else, and then they want to move their 401k plan over. And a lot of times they think, oh, I can only move it to another 401k plan or I'm going to get taxed. They don't understand that they can roll it over to any other qualified account and not experience a pre 59.5 penalty or taxation in doing that qualified rollover. It has to go from a like plan to another qualified like plan. Anything you want to mention on that, Ken?
Yeah, there's a lot, but we're going to keep it simple. We have a strategy in Solaris, and we understand what makes all investments work: time. Now, a lot of people, when they retire, they put their money into a fixed instrument that's going to give you income over time. Now, that's a good idea. But if you did it at 59 and a half instead of 65, you'd get 30% more money. You can't lose your principal. And in most cases, there's very little fees, not more than 1%. Why is this important? We have to start taking in, like we said, time value of money, but learn how investments work. All accounts, be they qualified for 401ks or anything, or fixed instruments, what makes all investments work is time. If you can master that simple concept, it will change how you look at your retirement planning.
So I put together some early withdrawal exceptions because a lot of people do not remember these. They don't know that these are available as far as hardships or early withdrawals. So if you have a qualified account, that would be a 401k, 403b, 457, IRA. Listen, if you're under 59 and a half, you can make a withdrawal and it will be exempt, meaning you're not going to pay that penalty if it's for qualified medical expenses. If it's to purchase a primary residence, and the limitation is $10,000 on that purchase of primary residence, but it's $10,000 that you could take out of your qualified account without a penalty. Obviously, if we have death before 59 and a half, there's not going to be a tax on no pre 59 and tax unless the beneficiaries are under that, and then there might be. Disability. If you become certified as disabled, you can access the funds in a qualified account without any penalty. That's very important. Health insurance premiums if you become unemployed. So if you are let go, let's just say from the current administration, and you receive a furlough from your job, hey, you could use some of your funds to help, and there's not going to be a penalty on that. College tuition for the next 12 months, or a 72T compliant transfer, or yeah, we could talk about that at another time. But I just wanted to bring up these particular and highlight these particular early withdrawals because a lot of people overlook these, that there is a way to not have a penalty and take some money out to help pay for a house, to be able to cover expenses for medical or disability. So those are all very important topics to cover. And I just want to mention too, depending upon the vehicle that you're using, there may or may not be additional surrender charges. If you're in some of the 403bs that are variable annuity products, there might be additional surrender charges. So make sure we talk about early withdrawal charges. Make sure that you look at all the possibilities, not just the ones that we've outlined here. So that was a basic overview of a 401k plan. Moving on to a simple IRA. The biggest difference between a simple IRA and a 401k is the complexity. Really easy to establish. There are lower contribution limits, but there are some requirements. Basically, the employer will be contributing to a simple IRA as opposed to a 401k plan. Um, there are, some other requirements when the documents can be filed for that, but that's for another conversation for another time. But for employees, the big thing to understand is that a simple IRA, slightly lower contribution limits, 16,500 if you're under 50. If you're over 50, there's an additional 3,500. If you're over the age of 59, there's an additional 5,200 that you can catch up. So you're about at the same point. Plus, there's a 2 to 3% mandatory contribution by the employer. So there are some advantages for the employees, definitely, because there are some 401k plans, a lot of them I know of. There's no matching. Isn't that right, Ken?
Yet there isn't. And the other thing we got to bring up, fees. The fees on these are extremely low compared to traditional retirement products. This is a really good alternative for businesses. We also use another strategy, Peter and I, when we use simple IRAs, for employee retention. How do you make your employees happy?
That's correct. There are some additional benefits that can be deployed to set aside additional funds for retirement. And so there are some of those non I don't want to call them non-normal, but they are traditional. They're just not in frequent use right now, and people are just not aware of them. But they are traditional. They've been around for over 50 years. So, but just people need to be made aware of it. Once again, the same rules when it comes to pre-59 and a half penalties on a simple IRA. It's the same payout, same requirements, same exceptions for the simple IRA. So let's move on to traditional IRAs. So traditional IRAs, the biggest difference when we talk about traditional IRA versus simple IRA or a 401k plan, what's the big difference between these two categories? And I think the one that people need to understand is if you have a 401k plan and you're working, as long as you're working, you don't have to have required minimum distributions that come out of it. If you're working with the IRAs, that they do require that. And so a lot of people transition from a 401k plan when they retire, they move it into an IRA. Now, the IRAs, there's a different sequence on the trustee ownership, right? So once things are moved into the IRAs, there's less of a third party administrator, more of a company, just keeping IRS up to date on things. I know that sounds a little weird, but there is a transition that happens from a 401k to an IRA. So anything you want to hit on that, Ken?
Well, they're also with traditional IRAs compared to most retirement 401ks, 403. There you can put you have a lot more choices of what to invest in.
The diversification aspect,
That
absolutely.
is really key. And that's, again, we're going to do one day, we're going to do a blog on just speaking about this because it's so much we can offer, but because of limited time, we can't.
So they grow tax deferred, the IRAs, the same as a 401k plan, the same as a simple 401k plan. You basically everything is going to be the same on that for tax deferral until you take the money out. The contribution limits are set at $7,000 right now for an IRA, which is why most people don't set up an individual retirement account. On average, very few people set it up with ongoing contributions going in. Only a few people do it or understand why. Matching catch up. There's an additional 1,000 that can be put in on catch up for these particular plans. They do help with maximizing savings when you're looking at the Roth side, and we're going to talk about that in a minute here. The same rules applied to the pre 59 and a half withdrawals. So when it comes to the Roth accounts, they have the same limits on a Roth IRA. Now you can, in some cases, have Roth 401ks. They do have Roth SEPs, and they do now have Roth simple IRAs as of Secure Act 2. They now allow for those post 2023. So now you can have a Roth simple IRA plan, or you can have a Roth SEP. So contribution limits are roughly the same when we talk about a Roth IRA, the same $7,000, 1,000 catch up. But the advantages are that the money that goes in here it's basically all the money we put into this account. It's going to go tax deferred. But then when you go to take the money out, it's all tax free. All of the distributions are going to be tax free. That's why we really like and support people and encourage people to save money in Roth accounts. Anything you want to hit on there, Ken?
Just there are some, if you make a certain amount of money in a Roth account, you may not qualify.
That's correct. After 182,000 as a couple going forward, you might not qualify, or they're going to reduce the contribution limits to that. And so, for people who generally make more than $200,000 collectively as a couple going forward, there's some other plans that you would then transition to rather than using the Roth accounts. There are some penalties. Once again, if you go to a qualified rollover from a Roth account to another Roth account, so let's take an example, a Roth 403B or a Roth 401k plan to a Roth IRA. No tax consequences whatsoever. One of the other big ones we'll just talk about here for a minute, there is a time requirement that has to be in place before you get access to this money. What is that, Ken? Can you hit on that?
Yeah, there's a 5-year wait. You have to wait 5 years to access your money. People do not know this. It is a horrible surprise sometimes for our clients that are They don't know this. But yes, there's a 5-year wait before you can access the money.
And what happens if somebody, you know, go ahead and they take the money out in 3 years? What happens?
Well, then you get a penalty. And then that's basically it. You get a penalty. You get slapped on the wrist.
So the penalty is a double tax. So that money that you've already paid taxes on, now it's going to be treated like a traditional IRA, and you're going to wind up paying more taxes on top of it. So it's really important to not screw that one up. Make sure you have ample time before accessing Roth accounts. So we always encourage people, and there's a lot of other financial advisors as well, use all of the traditional accounts first on your qualified accounts. So use your 401k, use your IRAs before touching the Roth accounts. We want to let the Roth accounts go as long as possible before accessing them, because not only the 5-year rule, but we also want to spend down the tax accounts or with the tax rates that we know that are currently in place before they change those. So,
well, there is a strategy that we were taught early on, that if taxes are high, you're not going to touch your traditional accounts because you're going to pay more money. If taxes are low, then you would go to the Roth side.
that's a great point.
Strategic tax planning.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. So let's look at required minimum distributions real quick here. So a 401k plan, once again, as long as you're working, you could work, I don't know why you'd want to, but maybe you work until age 80. You have no required minimum distributions. I've actually met and worked with some clients still working as doctors in their 80s. That is common. The traditional IRAs, the required minimum distribution age starts at 73 right now. That's probably going to transition a little higher, but right now it's at 73. So when the required minimum distributions, can you help explain that a little bit there, Ken?
Well, let's put it in the simplest format, and I'm not trying to be political, but you got to understand the government gave you a tax deduction. They want their money. Remember, when you have a qualified retirement account, unfortunately, we stay it like this. They're your partner. They want to start getting their money. What they don't want is for you to die. Because believe it or not, you say, well, they're going to pay taxes anyway. No, you're going to pay more taxes over time while you're taking it out. And this is something that people have to understand. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to take it out, or what do I do with it? Well, that's a whole nother meeting that we can talk about that. But yes, understanding RMDs, I think they're going to go to 75 with the new bill. I'm almost positive, which is something because people are working a lot longer now.
To catch up because they don't have the money they need when they wanted to retire. I'm in total agreement with that, Ken. So going back to this, so a simple IRA does have a required minimum distribution. Traditional IRA has required minimum distribution, and the Roth plan. So a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k plan or any Roth variant does not have a required minimum distribution while you are alive. However, when you pass the money on at death to your beneficiaries, there's another rule that applies, and that's a 10-year spend down. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, that's something I can tell you. When this happens, when you have a parent pass, God forbid, and it goes to you, people do not understand the taxation on it, and you have to spend that money down. If you have $1 million in there, you want to keep it for your investment, you're only in your 40s, you can't. You have to spend it down in 10 years. There's also something I want to bring up real quick, Peter. That rule at age 73, 2 years ago, was age 70 and a half. So now they gave 3 more years, and I really believe they're going to make it 75 for the fact that Peter said people do not have enough money to retire, so they're working longer.
Well, obviously, that's one part of the equation. What's the other dirty secret about that money and why they want that money to stay in the market?
Well, they don't want that money in the market. My opinion, like I said, there's different opinions on it. Why they don't want that money? Because you can lose it, and there's less to tax later on.
No, I was saying why, they want to extend the period of time from 70 and a half to 73 or eventually 75, because that leaves those dollars for Wall Street to work with. And
Yes, it
Wall
does.
Street will continue to cause, will continue to have individuals investing in their retirement plans on Wall Street, causes it to go up. That we can show historically from 1977 ish, when 401k plans were implemented, the stock market through the 70s, 60s and 70s basically didn't go anywhere. Maybe a 3% gain over that lost decade of the 70s. But then as soon as we started adding in these 401k plans, the stock market went through the roof.
Well, there's trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars that are invested in 401k and traditional retirement plans, and they drive the economy right now. They really
And so
do.
I believe extending that keeps artificially allows for the markets to continue to rise rather than paying the piper on some of these things.
It does bring up more problems later on. We'll discuss that at another time.
I totally agree. So the key differences are the taxations. The key differences are the contribution limits between a 401k, a simple IRA, a Roth plan, or a traditional IRA, right? So we've got 23, 16, 5, or $7,000 that we have respectively that we can contribute under age 50, and then all the catch ups on top of that. There is required minimum distributions for most of these accounts. Those are really the key differences behind all these. Now, I know we didn't spend a lot of time on a 403B, but literally a 403B mimics 90% of the rules of a 401k plan. Okay, there's a couple little nuances, but pretty much right alongside that. So we encourage everybody to have a retirement professional work with you. It doesn't matter. You can go through all kinds of publications, Forbes, Bloomberg, so many publications out there talking about those who retire with the help of a financial professional versus those that don't. And those that do work with a financial professional, even if they're an insurance agent that helps you, have on average 25 to as much as 40% more money in their retirements than those that just don't employ or work with a financial professional. So we encourage everybody to work with a local financial professional to help you achieve your goals. Anything you want to add to that, Ken?
No, there is just one little thing. Understand what businesses are. If you go to a company that's a brokerage firm, they're going to tell you to keep the money in the market because that's what they do. If you're going to go to an insurance agent, they're going to go to fixed product. What's the right answer? The right answer is educating yourself and get a combination. I personally believe you need to start at 59 and a half to start moving your money into safe money, which we call fixed products. This will increase the amount of money you have in retirement. I believe 30 to 50%, depending on the market. I can't guess the number because I don't know what the market situation is going to be, but
You also don't know their personal situation, so.
no, we don't.
So with that, Ken, let's move on because we're running out of time here today. Let's talk about for a couple minutes here some of the alternative retirement account options. A lot of people don't understand that there are over 27 distinct IRS codes that are utilized for retirement planning. So we start talking about 7702, 162, TDAs, NQDCs, defined benefit, profit sharing, cash balance, pension plans, self-directed IRAs. All of these 414, 409A. So a lot of these different codes are all identifying that these are vehicles that can be used to fund an individual's retirement, whether or not they're mainstream.
Well, one of the things I want to make people understand, my whole career, I started out in Wall Street. I was a stock jock. I was an investment banker. I now use those plans more, and I am more comfortable doing it for a client than just using traditional retirement accounts. And we're going to have a whole blog on that someday, but we don't have the time to go into it. But my favorite rule in that, if anybody want to know, is 7702, which we use a tax code called 162 executive bonus programs, or just an IUL life insurance policy. And we'll touch on that at another time.
So let's talk about this for just a minute. As an employee, you may get a party when you retire because maybe they're happy you're leaving. Maybe because they're going to miss you. But once you're in retirement, does anybody ever expect or receive calls from the company wondering how they're doing in retirement?
I've never heard of it. That's a good question. I've never heard of that before.
Why do I bring this up? I bring it up because it's important that your retirement is just that. It's the retirement that's meant for you specifically. And that's why we encourage individuals to review all of the options available to them and find which combination of the available plans is going to help you achieve your goals based on your time horizon, your risk tolerance, and your overall objectives, financially speaking. And that's where Ken and a lot of our other financial representatives that work with us, we want to sit down and do that due diligence up front. We want to understand your goals before we apply, what could be a good solution, or it could be any other financial professional does that. But we encourage people to explore and become educated on the options that are out there. Don't just settle for, okay, well, I got a 401k plan. I don't need to do anything else. Probably not going to be the best played strategy. I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, there's something else you could tweak, change, or make better that's going to free up more money. As an example, if you have a 401k plan, but then you add a Roth IRA account, just that extra Roth IRA account on the side, now all of the money you put into that Roth IRA account, whatever it grows to, you automatically have 30% more spendable money because you no longer have IRS as the partner to that retirement account. So it's little things like that that are going to help you get over that particular hump in the road or that shortfall that exists in retirement planning. So once again, the importance is making sure that you meet with a financial professional to help you navigate these waters and understand the limitations of what you're currently doing and see if there's a better or a simpler, in many cases, way for you to achieve success. The only way we know what the finish line is if we can measure where you are today. We have our objective of when we want to get there and see how funded is that retirement. Is it going to be able to deliver and get you to your goal on time where you're trying to go? Understand the contribution limits and understand there are other alternative accounts that you can use or deploy to exceed the contribution limits that might be hindering you from achieving your goals right now. Anything you want to add to that, Ken?
Well, I want you to think about something that's not a conspiracy theory. Why is the limit 7%? Why isn't it 15? They want people to make more money. Understand controlling people's income is how you control a society. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Do the math. Why can't you put in 12%? Why can't you put in 15%? They're going to make more money on the back end. So that's something to take into consideration. Please talk to a financial advisor, but don't just talk to a financial advisor who has one solution for everything. Talk to someone who's educated enough to offer you options. And what Peter was discussing earlier, using multiple systems, it's called layering. And you should really take the time to learn about that.
So avoiding those most common mistakes is people are just put all their eggs in one basket, right? We talked about diversification earlier. Diversify your risk, diversify your tax risk, diversify, obviously the market risk, but also your time horizon, right? You need to diversify those things. So you have different pieces that are coming due at different times to offset. Maybe you're going to live longer. Maybe you've got inflation to deal with. All of those things, diversification can be applied to, but it does mean, like Ken just said, you might need a blended portfolio, not just one particular solution. So we encourage everybody to do that. There are additional resources online for this, or you can connect with us at the end of the conversation today, if you'd like to have a retirement income gap put together, a first step towards any plan is understanding where you are. And that's what we do. We have a whole process to ascertain how we can help you, where your shortfall is, how much more money do you need to save every month, and get you on track. And that's so important. We're big proponents of this. We believe whether you work with us or not, having a plan that you've outlined that you can follow, you're going to have success. Because if you don't plan for success, you plan for what, Ken?
You're going to fail. And Peter, how much do these reports cost?
So these are provided with no additional cost, no cost whatsoever. This is for educational purposes only. We want people to be educated on their options.
Well, I really enjoyed our vlog today, and I'd like to go into more detail about these plans to educate people more. And Peter and I dedicated our whole lives to educating people about these discussions because this is so very important.
Well, I appreciate it, Ken. I know we had a whole lot to cover. We got through it in right about an hour here. And I appreciate your time. I know you've had a big week with all the things going on your end. And we appreciate all of you who are listening to us. Thank you very much for viewing. And if it's possible to like and to subscribe, and hey, leave us a little comment if you like what we're saying or like what we're talking about, or if there's a topic you'd like us to be able to review or talk on. We're open to all of that as we go forward here. So thank you very much. From Main Street to your street, I'm Peter DeRosa.
I'm Ken Lamantia.
We thank you very much. Thanks, Ken.